Sit back, it's time to get groovy. Question, do you remember that movie?
Welcome back to Remember That Movie. I am the third Alejandro Rosa on IMDb.
And I'm Steve Johnston, not on IMDb.
And we're going to start this episode with an apology. I am sick, and so my voice has a different tone to it, and that just means that I'm probably going to cough a lot during this episode, and I'll try to hide that and delete them, but I may not always succeed.
It sounds good, though, oddly enough.
I want you to know, Steve, that I am sitting on a chair that swivels, and now I just ran into the wall because I'm not used to being on a chair that swivels, and I don't know why I did this to myself, because if I'm in a thing that swivels, I will swivel. So this is, you know what this is? This is great YouTube content.
Yes, it is.
People watching me swing back and forth. Okay. All right. Welcome back. Welcome back, folks. Welcome for the very first time. What do we do? We go and we watch old films, often films that we recall, possibly from our childhood, and we share it with our co-host and see what they think. Sometimes both of us have seen the film. Sometimes only one of us has seen the film. Not for the episode, just in general, in life. And then we watch it, and then we talk about it. So this is one of those cases. Today, this morning, wherever you are in the time zone, we are going back to 1986/1985. And I will explain that in a moment.
I was hoping that you would.
For Ridley Scott's Legend. But before we talk about Legend, we're going to take a moment. We're going to take a moment to talk about today. We're always in the past in this show, so we like to take a little fast forward to now. Steve.
Sir.
Question.
Yes.
What have you been up to? What have you been watching? Have you been watching anything since we last spoke?
I have not been watching anything since we last spoke. Life at the moment has been consumed with planning a big life event for our daughter. So I'm afraid I have not really had the chance to just sit down, unwind, and watch anything, which means that for the, I think, fourth week now, I have to say I still haven't finished Our Flag Means Death. It is first on the list as soon as I get back to the couch.
Very nice, very nice.
And you, sir, what have you been watching?
Well, I'm not trying to compare and express if one of us is better than the other, but I had a dog get skunked. Same dog was playing with what I thought was a ball, but ended up being a dead groundhog, and I still had time to watch TV. Okay, so what did I watch? What have I been watching? I started the third season of Only Murders in the Building.
Very
which
good.
So far is brilliant, and now has Meryl Streep in it. Who is fantastic. I mean, she's regularly fantastic, but unsurprisingly, she is fantastic in this. And we've actually been rewatching a show, one of the ones that we just loved going back to and just starting over, and that is Superstore. Superstore was a very funny show that I don't think got enough credit. And actually, when I first started watching it, I wasn't sure that I was going to like it, but I have rewatched that show multiple times over, and we're doing that right now. So,
nice.
And last night, I finished the last episode of season 1 of The Great, and it ended amazingly, and hopefully I'll start season 2 tonight or tomorrow.
Excellent.
I just banged into the wall again.
I think you're going to be doing that all evening.
I think so too. Swivels. Sorry, folks. All right.
That's all right, because we can put in a little blurb that this episode is banging.
Okay, here we go. Let's see here. All right, we did that bit. Okay, now let's go. Let's go all the way back to Legend. Legend was directed by Ridley Scott. It was written by William, I want to say it's Hjortsberg.
Okay.
That's right. You don't know this. I do.
I don't know.
He's an American writer, but whose parents, I think, were from Sweden. Ridley Scott had this idea. He conceived of this, a hermit who becomes a hero while trying to save a princess and, try to save the world from a wintry curse. Ridley Scott studied a lot of the old fairy tales, including the Brothers Grimm stories, and then he met or worked with William Hjortsberg to create a script around this idea. They worked on it pretty extensively. This script had 15 different versions. Oof. Yeah, so he comes up with Legend. What I actually read was that he came up with Legend while he was working on Blade Runner. There's a scene in Blade Runner that has a unicorn in it.
Yes.
That wasn't released initially and was released later, or was included later. That was the idea. He saw the unicorn, he did that scene, and he thought, there's a story with a unicorn that I want to do.
Okay.
So he came up with it, and then they worked on it, and we got Legend. This film stars a couple of very young actors. One, Sara. This is actually her film debut. She made this, and then shortly after, made the movie that she's most famous for. Do you know what that is?
I do not.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh, okay. Very good.
That's her. She did that shortly after doing this. I think the following year or something like that.
Okay.
She plays Princess Lily, though we pretty much refer to her as Lily throughout the thing. There's a character named Jack O'Green, or Jack the Green Man, but they really just refer to him as Jack.
Jack.
And that is played by Mr. Tom Cruise in his seventh career film.
A ridiculously young Tom Cruise. Now, Tom
Ridiculously
Cruise looks young on the, normally, but
yeah,
this was shocking.
Yeah, this was after The Outsiders. This was after, Taps? And this was right shortly after Risky Business. So he's,
Okay.
he's doing really well. But this is before Top Gun. And we'll come back to that. And then we have a series of other actors that one I actually recognized, which was Roberto Picardo.
Yes.
The other actors, I knew them less. We have Gump, the elf / forest guardian, played by David Bennett. We have Blix, who's the leader of the Goblin Minions.
Yes.
She's played by Alice Playton. And then we have a series of other actors as well. I didn't know any of these actors. I've only recognized Roberto Picardo when I saw his picture. And I went, hey, I know you.
See, I recognized his name, but you do not recognize him in the film because of the part that he plays.
Absolutely. Yeah, which goes into this film. Also, Alice Playton has 2 credits in this film.
Oh.
Alice Playton, who played Blix, leader of the Goblins. Mm-hmm. She has another credit in the film that I'll go into.
Excellent. I do believe you're missing a cast member, sir.
How do you even know that? You've never even watched this film. How do you already know the cast? That is unfair. Folks, I'm not going to lie. If you could see the camera, for those of you on the podcast alone, I'm holding up my notes, right? I don't recognize most of these actors. There were 2 that I sort of thought, I've seen you in something. And somehow, and I'm the one who's actually watched this film in the past. But Steve, you have not watched this film. Who are you? Oh, I know who you're talking about. I just looked at my list, guys. It's actually at the top of the list, guys, and I didn't read it. I'm sorry. Well done, Steve. Steve, tell us, who am I missing?
The person you managed to forget, which is, I have to say, quite impressive. Please forgive me. Under heavy makeup and prosthetics, but with a voice that is quite distinguishable, and you pick it out as soon as he opens his mouth. We have the Lord of Darkness, played by the incomparable Tim Curry.
Absolutely phenomenal. And
yes,
the subject of my childhood nightmares at times.
I believe it.
Yeah. This film, not Tim Curry. I wasn't having weird dreams with Tim Curry. I was having with the Lord of Darkness.
No, the Lord of Darkness would give you nightmares. I can absolutely believe that.
Yeah. And because I did this with everyone, Tim Curry, this was around the time that he also completed a film that I still adore, which is Clue.
Clue, excellent. Yes.
We have to describe what this film is, and I do not know if I'm going to be able to do this right, but I will try. So let's do our plot in 60 seconds.
Plot in 60 seconds.
One moment.
Take your time, collect your thoughts, collect yourself, have a drink to clear your throat.
Goodness. Okay, I have ran into this. It's too close. I'm running into it like all the time. Okay. In a fairy tale land, Princess Lily runs around the forest looking for her friend, Jack, who appears to live in the forest. These two characters are then introduced to unicorns, which at the same time are being hunted by goblins who work for the Lord of Darkness. At some point, one of the unicorns loses their horn because it is chopped off and taken to the Lord, and so begins an adventure in which Jack and Lily get separated. Lily ends up at the tree palace of the Dark Lord, and Jack, with the help of some fairies and some elves, has to take on the mantle of hero and try to save the day. Yeah, that's it. I don't know how else to explain it.
That's pretty good.
So there you go. Yeah, that is this movie. I watched this film many times as a young child.
Young Alejandro.
Very young, little tiny boy. Because when I was growing up, we had one premium channel, HBO.
Oh,
and
okay. Nice.
At that time, HBO didn't create original programming. They were fairly new. So what they did was they would just buy movies and put them on. And Legend was one of the ones that they had on all the time. But again, I don't know why I was watching this as such a young kid. It is not a children's movie, which we will also talk about. It is not a children's movie, though the description of unicorns and, a guy who lives in the woods and a beautiful princess and fairies and elves, it sounds like a kid movie, but it's not. Stephen, had you ever watched this before?
I had not seen this before, no. This is one of those movies that I was aware of, largely because of Tim Curry and his character, but had never actually seen. So this was fun.
Great. Well, we have to start. We just have to rip the Band-Aid off. So what'd you think?
Oh, many thoughts. Where to begin? So it's odd that you mentioned that this is not a children's film. I agree with you that it's not designed to be a children's film, but I don't think there's any harm in children watching it. As I was partaking for the first time, I was just getting very serious Labyrinth and Dark Crystal vibes.
When Ridley Scott came up with this idea, he very much was thinking of like a sort of independent film that, a few people are going to like, but it's not made for mass consuming.
Mass consumption, okay.
No. He had a very darker film in mind. And in fact, part of the reasons it was written over and over again was because of that. Because they started in a very dark adult place. I think there was a weird sex scene between the Dark Lord and Lily that ended up getting cut.
Goodness.
Yeah. Ooh. You can find the description online, folks. Yikes. So, but that's how dark it was. It was very different. And then they lightened it up and lightened it up and lightened it up until it is what it is now. Since you have seen both Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, what did you think of this film? What stood out?
Right off the bat, I was struck by the visuals, the set design, the cinematography, all of that absolutely gorgeous. This is a very beautiful film in terms of the visuals that you are seeing. Oddly enough, one of the first notes that I have is that this is the first movie that I have watched in a very long time in which the director has actually placed objects between the camera and the actors so that you were shooting through branches and through foliage in the forest scenes.
Yeah. Which
was not bad, just very unusual compared to what I am used to seeing.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing that struck me was just the amount of feathers and leaves and dust in the air, especially in the early scenes before the snow comes into play.
I know it was 1985, 1986, but oh my God, there is so much glitter in this movie.
Yes.
I wrote it down as a note, so much glitter everywhere you look. Everyone. And for no reason, like Jack's in the woods and he looks over a tree and he's got glitter all over his face. And he didn't have it before. It's like, where did you get? Is it just coming from the sky? Everyone. Just so much glitter. What a weird choice to make. Let's put everyone in glitter. So it's magical, I guess. It's magical.
Yes.
In the forest. I don't know. We've already talked about this, but there was a scene where one of the unicorns has their horn cut off.
Yes.
That was terrifying. You know what I've struggled with? I've been trying to determine if this is a good film or not.
I too am at kind of a loss for that because in my overall opinion, this is a good film, but it's got its shortcomings.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Well, go ahead.
Oddly enough, this is about the third or fourth film I've said this of.
Okay.
And that is, it's not until after like the first half hour that the movie actually gets going.
That's right. Sure.
So,
I understand.
Let's actually start.
So you do not like setup. You don't like films that have to set everything up for you.
I do like setup. In fact, what I'm assuming is going to be the previous episode of us talking to this. I very much liked how we kind of just got straight into the action and introduced the characters, and it was good.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to go back to the very beginning of this film, and I mean the very beginning, because we get a lot of exposition via a scroll. This is what's going on. These are who the characters are. And then we're kind of dumped in and we meet them.
Yes.
Did you think that worked? Did you think that could be better? Character introductions are very abrupt in this film. Tim Curry's was excellent.
Yeah.
Sitting in the shadows with the glowing green eyes.
Neon green eyes and neon nails.
Loved it.
But he was almost total darkness, so when he opened his eyes and it was neon green and his nails came out, it was terrifying.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
And then we are introduced to Lily. Now, from the opening text scroll, we know that Lily is pure of heart. And
that's right.
That is one of the reasons that she is able to actually see and meet with the unicorns.
Mm-hmm.
But the very first thing that we see her do is sneak up to a peasant woman and dump her laundry on the ground.
And then she sneaks into the peasant woman's house and starts eating her food.
Yes.
And I wrote down, thief, breaking and entering.
But pure of heart.
But then you realize, and I had to correct this in my notes, because then you realize that she's friends with the peasants.
Yes.
They're like, really tight friends, to the point that she's like, you have to stop coming around here. Like, you can't be hanging out with us common folk.
You're supposed to be off marrying a prince or something like that.
Yes.
Not mucking around in our tree.
I will say, there is something that's interesting about this film. They mention another, a kingdom and things like that. We never see it.
Nope.
Everything takes place in the forest.
Yep.
And that's it. And I thought that was very odd. Usually you get some sense of...
That's
they show
going to play into...
Oh, go ahead.
No, it's going to play into a comment that I will make later once we get to our overall thoughts on the film.
Sure. Okay.
But yes, you are absolutely correct.
This is going to apparently be an entire episode of anticipation as Steve and I just continue to say, we'll bring that up later.
We're going to talk about that later. You'll just have to wait.
Dun, 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 dun.
Now
okay.
watch, we're going to forget to mention half of the stuff.
This stuff I won't remember. So let me just go ahead and fix something.
Okay.
The film was released in the U.S. April 18th, 1986.
Okay.
Okay. But it was actually released in Europe in August of 1985.
Thank you. I was curious because in doing the minuscule bit of research that I am
Did
allowed
you break
to
the
do.
rules? Did you break the rules?
No, just looking at, I just noticed that when I was looking up the movie, it had both 1985 and 1986, and I was trying to figure out which one is it. So,
Well, let's
thank
talk
you for
about
that.
it. So they filmed in England, actually, except they're actually in a studio, of course,
Yep.
except for one section of the film,
Yep.
which they filmed in Silver Springs, Florida.
Yes.
The swimming, diving scenes in the film were done in Florida. Everything else was in England, but this had to be in Florida, in Silver Springs, because of the water.
Yes.
They said that the water was the perfect clearness, and that's what they wanted to do.
Silver Springs is, although I have not visited myself, I know people who have visited it, and it is like crystal clear water. It is beautiful.
Yeah.
So when I saw Ocala, Florida, and Silver Springs in the credits, I kind of got a big beaming smile on my face, like, aha, it's my neck of the woods, yay!
Steve stayed for the credits
I did.
and read them.
I did.
There are a lot of people very supportive of you right now. So interesting about those swimming scenes. So there's a couple of scenes in which Jack has to dive into the water. And again, they filmed this in Florida. He, unsurprisingly, Tom Cruise, even then, did his own stunts. So he did the diving, and all the underwater scenes were him.
Nice.
And Ridley Scott said, there were alligators about 25 feet from where we were.
Yep.
So, but that's Tom Cruise for you. That's the kind of stuff he'd do. So they delayed this film coming to America till 1986 for one particular reason. So this film has an original composer, Jerry Goldsmith.
Yes.
He composed all the music for the film and typically he'd spend 6 to 10 weeks working on. He spent 6 months creating all the music for this film.
Wow.
And when they were bringing the film to the U.S. market, they had a delay in the release because somebody had the bright idea that instead of using Jerry Goldsmith's work that he had spent 6 months of his life on, they were going to replace it with the German electronic music band Tangerine Dream. The Yes lead singer John Anderson and singer-songwriter Brian Ferry of Roxy Music. So they decided to actually put these people in, and the reason was delayed because these people needed time to create the music they were going to use for this film. I will have to say, from Mr. Goldsmith's perspective, I would be confused. There is a quote. I have a quote from him.
Oh, awesome.
It says that this dreamy, bucolic setting is suddenly to be scored by a techno-pop group seems sort of strange to me. And I will say, it was strange to me too, Mr. Goldsmith. You can actually go and listen to the entire soundtrack that he wrote on YouTube. It's there.
Okay.
I actually listened to part of it. There's still parts of it that sound like it's in the 80s.
Yes.
But some of it has a lot more cinematic music to it. Very interesting.
So, was there ever a version released that had Goldsmith's music to it, or was it all Tangerine Dream?
You know what I'm going to say to that?
You're not entirely sure. Okay.
No, I do know.
Oh.
I'll get to it. That's for the end.
That's for the end.
That's for the end bit. Okay. Well, we're going to have to tell him something because we just keep postponing everything.
Yes. Yeah.
So, okay. So let's see here. This movie had a budget of $24.5 million. Do you want to know how much money this movie made?
I do, because I am darn curious to know if this was successful or not.
Excellent. With a budget of $24.5 million, the movie Legend made $23.5 million.
Oh.
They did not break even.
Okay.
I'm going to give a shout out to Dr. Tracy. Dr. Tracy, everything leads back to Top Gun.
It's true.
Remember I said that this film was delayed being released?
Yes.
And they released it in April of 1996.
Oh, no.
Do you know what was released in May of 86. In May of 1986, a month later?
The context clues are all there, so I'm going to say Top Gun, right?
Top Gun. It was the top grossing film of 1986, and so you can imagine it left corpses of other movies in its wake. Among them, Legend. Legend didn't stand a chance once Top Gun came out. Let me ask you this question.
Yes.
Do you think this film works?
Grand scheme of things? Yes. But... And we may as well actually get to some of the points that we've been pushing back, I think.
We've only been dancing around it for a while, yes.
Yes, yeah. So my overall opinion of this movie is that it is a good movie.
Yeah.
Yes, it works. But I could not help but think that there is a huge amount of world building that went on behind the scenes. That every single character has a backstory. There is the tree that the Dark Lord lives in. You can see that there are ruins around the base, and I just figured there has to be some actual history that went into what those ruins are, why they're there, what it used to be, things like that.
Yes.
But we never get to see the world building. We have what I consider to be a vast, huge scope of a story told through a very, very narrow window.
That's exactly my thought on this film as well.
The world seems empty. I want to sort of do a comparison to another story, another movie, that is Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Okay.
And I'm going to bring this one up just because they have a similar scenario where, a sudden winter has set upon the land.
Yeah.
In Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we meet various characters going about their daily lives who complain about the cold but are making the best of it. In Legend, we don't see anyone outside of our protagonists and our antagonists. They do not meet anyone else along the
There are no passerbys. There's
passerbys.
nothing.
The only real people that we meet are what's her name, Nell, I think, the washerwoman that Lily torments at the very beginning.
Yes.
And that's it. So it is
Pause
a
right there.
huge empty world. And
It is
now
a huge
I will
empty
pause
world.
because you asked me to. Sorry.
I'm pausing because since we said, why would a child have any objection to this film?
Mhm.
What happens to Nell, Stephen?
Well, Nell and her family,
Including a baby.
including the baby. Now, this is going to go to another point that I would like to mention. When the unicorn is killed and darkness begins to creep upon the land and snow falls everywhere and the land freezes over, Nell, the baby, and what I assume is her husband all freeze. Just in place.
Frozen in place.
Frozen in place.
Freeze to death is what they're insinuating.
Is it, though? Because at the end of the movie, everyone is back to their normal selves. My assumption was that once darkness was defeated and the snowstorm had lifted, that if we went back to the tree, Nell would still be there with smiling, happy family.
Okay. But I have a question then.
Okay.
Did we see them at the end?
No, we did not.
Okay. So, yeah. And we don't know. Jack is underwater when the winter hits. Where is Lily? Do you remember? She's just screaming. Because she's a human. So even if you thought that the fairies and the elves were fine because they were fairies and elves, okay, that makes sense. And Jack was underwater, so maybe he's okay because he's underwater. But Lily was just out there, so she didn't freeze to death.
No.
So just a little inconsistency there.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. She's only the peasant family died. They show no one else dying. Now, there was a very limited cast,
right.
So there was nobody to show dying. But again, doesn't explain Lily who was out in it, not freezing to death or something.
Would this fall into the category of retconning, or is this headcanon? I'm not sure which. But
I don't know what either of those things mean.
I would assume that because at this point Lily was actually touched by the unicorn permitted her to stroke him, that there was some sort of magic imbued in her that allowed her to be okay when the snowstorm hit.
I mean, that's as good an explanation as any. They don't give us one, so we just have to make it up.
Yep.
Okay, sure. All right. Interesting thing about this film, which is 89 minutes, was originally 125. That was the first cut, 125 minutes.
Okay, so what did they eliminate? Because I would be darn curious to see the 2-hour, 5-minute version of this film. There were scenes that seemed either very rushed or very quickly glossed over.
Yes.
For example, the Cave of Treasures scene.
Yes.
Gump says, go down that hole, you'll find, weaponry and armor and stuff like that.
That's right. That you need to be a hero. And he literally goes into a tunnel and gets the stuff and then leaves. But that's it.
No, there is a confusing bit, which made me raise an eyebrow, because he goes into the tunnel, as you say. He finds the treasure, and then the minuscule fairy that has been accompanying him suddenly grows life-size, says, it's our little secret, and then next scene.
That's right. There's a great Annabelle Lanyon performed as Una, who was a little tiny, I think, Tinkerbell. Very much Tinkerbell. Very. And then, in this scene, randomly turns into life-size, which she's supposed to not do, apparently. And also has one of the creepier moments in the film. And I have to explain. Annabelle Lanyon is 25 when she makes this film, but she does not look 25. She looks sort of like a child. She's very young looking. And in that cave, our cave of secrets, she says, I can be anything you desire. And I felt uncomfortable. It's like, what? What? She's like 12. What are you saying? And that's what Una says to Jack, because clearly she has feelings for him. Very much like Tinkerbell and Peter Pan at some point. Interesting enough, Jack is sort of dressed like Peter Pan. This is actually one of the biggest issues I have with this film. This film feels like it got chopped up. Mm-hmm. And clearly it did. In fact, it was 125 minutes originally. Then they cut it down to 95 minutes. Okay. And that is the European release of this film. Is 95 minutes long, the original.
Okay.
And then when they decided to release it in America, they cut from 95 down to 89. And that's what got released here.
Is there any record of what the 6 minutes were that they felt they had to cut for the American audience?
Yes, there was another elf, another one. Okay. And mostly it had to do with just cutting their scenes, because Ridley Scott was concerned he didn't want there to be too many subplots. This is another thing with the structure of this film. So we talked about how this is based on fairy tales. Fairy tales tend to have a very specific format, and usually the telling of fairy tales has a very specific format. Well, Ridley Scott was clearly experimenting, and he didn't want that. He didn't want it to follow a classical structure. He wanted something sort of more modern. And again, I think this is all because you have to think about this film as originally intended to be a sort of edgy, independent, dark, fairy tale. But then it got messed with. And it did get messed with. It got messed with by studios. The studio, when they were presenting, like, this is what we're doing with this film. It's dark. It's a fairy tale, but it's for adults, and there's sex in it, and there's the studio went, no. Can you make that less of that so that kids will go watch it? And they were like, we're not making a kids' film. And the studio said, we have the money.
Yes, you are.
And Ridley Scott said, I think some of these changes are great. And how could he not? How could he not? So essentially, the way it was best described was they wanted to Disney-fy this film. And I think that's part of some of the mishmash with this movie. Is it a kid's movie? Is it not a kid's movie? It's got dark stuff. It's got light stuff. It's got cute little fairies. But it also has disgusting creatures. And can we talk about the demon cooks? Because that's what they're actually called.
Yes.
Demon cooks. At the Lord of Darkness's house, there is a scene where they show, and again, I just want to remind everyone, Steven said this was fine for kids. There is a table and a man on the table who is being cooked or cut or whatever by a giant, scary-looking thing, which in the credits actually demon cooks. And later, this is confirmed when one of our tiny little people ends up in a actual pie that they were going to bake. So he's in there tied up going, and then they take him out. So there is no question. But again, kids, Uncle Steven says it's okay to watch this. So,
if you can handle the Skeksis and the essence draining scene, you can handle this.
Okay, but hold on. That's another. That's actually that's a different episode where we get to say thanks for the trauma.
Yeah.
I can't. We can't get away from this. This film is too small for what they're trying to do. It's like you can't. Can you make a fantasy story that is like deep, deep fantasy and not world build to the size that is needed to tell the story? I think that's where this movie fails.
Agreed.
Right? I think it's just, and maybe we needed the 125 minutes. I don't know. This film was not a commercial success, but it did get a couple of nominations. And I would actually put this under the category of the good. We talk about the good, and then we'll talk about our quibbles, which might be just most of the episode. But as far as the good, this film got 1 Oscar nomination. Can you imagine what it was for?
Cinematography.
No. Close.
Set design.
No. Makeup.
Oh, of course.
Makeup.
Oh, it's so obvious now.
Yeah. It also was nominated for 3 BAFTAs.
Yes. Which ones? I'm curious to know.
Makeup.
Good.
Visual effects.
Nice.
And costume design.
Wonderful.
So let me ask you this. What does this film get right?
Anything visual. The set design, the cinematography, the costuming, the makeup, anything that it was nominated for an award for, it's great. It is, I think I mentioned towards the beginning, I said this was a gorgeous film to watch.
Yes.
So that is what it gets right. In my opinion, I also think that plot-wise, the second half, maybe last third of the film is good. Once we narrow down to, okay, Jack is going to assault the Dark Lord's fortress, and they're going to have the epic battle between good and light. Once we narrow it down to that,
okay,
I like it.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. It's what is good. I loved the makeup. I think I loved it when I was a child. It was terrifying when I was a child. It is still terrifying. Meg Mucklebones, which is a creature that comes out of the water, is absolutely freaking terrifying.
Terrifying.
Blix, head of the goblins, that costume, phenomenal. Still looks phenomenal. Most of these actors who played most of the characters had to be in makeup for hours. Typically about 3 hours for each one. Blix had to be in there for 3 hours. Tim Curry, who had not only a face that was completely done up, but he had giant horns on his head And his actual chest was also part of the costume, and he had his arms and everything. He was in makeup 5.5 hours a day. That's how long it took. And then, of course, they had to take it off, and they had to take it off very carefully.
Right.
There's apparently some instance where he got really claustrophobic could not deal with it and tried to take it off and ended up hurting his skin because of how everything was attached.
Oh, okay, yeah.
This film had a couple of setbacks. They used like 4 or 5 different sound stages. Their main soundstage, 10 days before end of filming, caught on fire.
I was going to say, this burned to the ground, didn't it?
It burned to the ground.
Was this Pinewood Studios?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you remember the character of Gump, our elf forest guardian?
Yes.
Did you note his voice?
I have a note here that says Gump's voice because I am hoping you're going to tell me that he was ADR'd.
He was. Alice Playton, who did the head goblin, Blix,
yeah.
She also did his voice.
Oh, I can hear it now, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, okay.
They did that.
Okay.
And I looked this up. There were several different versions of this story.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them said it was the studio. Some of them said it was one particular executive. We'll never know. Was that David Bennett is a Swiss actor. And they complained that his accent was so thick that nobody was going to understand what the hell he was saying.
Okay.
And so their solution was ask Alice to do his lines for him. So we think makeup, costumes. I think costumes, sort of. There were a couple I had questions about, like Jack's costume. Again, Puck. So, fly, Peter, fly. He just, yeah. So, what? But let's get to this part. What are our quibbles?
As alluded to earlier, just the way the plot is presented. This is a very big world, but we're looking at it through a very, very small glass. Certain parts of it feel rushed, as you mentioned, probably due to the cutting up that had to occur. I also was confused by the character of Lily at the beginning. She seemed a little just inconsistent in her characterization. That's maybe not the best way of putting it.
Okay.
Here is a scene, and perhaps you will understand why I kind of went, huh? Here is this ring. Whoever finds this ring, I shall wed. Throws it into Silver Springs. Jack immediately dives off the cliff into the water, and she screams his name like, no, you weren't supposed to do that. Jack! Jack, what are you doing? Why? Surely you meant for him to go after it, yes?
Right. Oh, no, I didn't mean you.
Yeah.
It's like, what? You're right. I never thought about that, but that's true. Why does she freak out?
Yeah.
And also, he lives in the woods. He's a wood person. I'm pretty sure we know he knows how to swim.
He'll be
fine.
Know?
He'll be okay. Yeah. It's just weird. I honestly think one of my biggest issues with this film, my quibbles, trademark pending, is Lily. She's just sort of there, right? She's like she runs around at the beginning of the film like Ophelia, and it's just like, la 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 la, and then, oh, Jack, you scared me, when he pops out of a tree while she's looking for him. And then, she does some screaming.
Yeah.
She does some, because Jack is feral, which is something we don't get into. Also, we'll get to the sunset scene. So Jack is feral. And what are you doing? And then she screams. She touches the unicorn, then she starts screaming when somebody attacks the unicorn. And then she's desperate and runs around, and then she's enslaved by the Lord of Darkness, and then she's unconscious. and then she's conscious. And that's Lily.
I agree with you. The Lily's first part is just kind of, all right, who is this character? What is she doing? Why is she doing it? Once darkness falls, and once I'd say, trying to think of what scene there is the sort of the turn where her character turned for me.
Sure.
And I want to say it's the one where she kind of realizes that what is going on is her fault and she needs to make it right.
That's true.
And then she has a purpose. And as soon as she gets the purpose, she's a bit more driven. She's a bit more taking matters into her own hands. And that's where I think the character of Lily flourishes and actually gets better.
You know what? I think you're absolutely right, in retrospect. Especially at the end of the film.
Yes.
She pretends to be all pro Lord of Darkness. She's pro dark. And like to be under his spell. And then she uses that in order to free the unicorn. So yeah, I just took all my words, I put them in a little salad, and I ate them. Because she does have a purpose.
The latter half of the movie. The first half,
That's
your
true.
word salad is absolutely spot on.
Thank you. So yes, I think that, and again, that doesn't take anything away from Mia Sara. I actually thought she was great in this film.
Yes.
It's her first movie. Now, you asked a question, so let's get to it.
Okay.
This film has 3 different endings. Dun, dun, dun. So, we watched the U.S. ending.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Very good.
And in the U.S. ending, we see everybody walking away into the sunset, which, by the way, makes 0 sense to me. And then for some reason, they show the Lord of Darkness, who we thought was, thrown into oblivion, just going, I don't know why that was necessary. Okay. Well, they added that for the American version. In the European version, he doesn't appear at the end.
Okay,
it's
that
just
makes
them.
far more sense. Yeah.
Which it does, because they won, right? Interesting enough, there is, Stephen, a director's cut.
Ooh.
And the director's cut has a different ending.
Okay.
So...
Actually, this is Ridley Scott we're talking about. This does not surprise me in the slightest.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I mean, in the, of course, in the end of this film, Jack wakes up Lily, they're in love, and then it's my favorite weird ending of all time. Jack and Lily seem to be running towards the sunset, and they stop and they wave back at their friends. And their friends, the fairies and the elves and the unicorns, are like far away, and they're all waving back. Not the unicorns. Yep. I'm not saying the unicorns are waving, but everyone else is waving back. And then I wanted to be like, where are they going? Like, Jack,
over
Jack,
that hill.
We're gonna go over there. Jack, don't you live in these woods?
Not anymore, because he's going to marry the princess and move into the castle. And
I guess that would make sense if we had ever seen a castle.
The castle, yes.
Right? We don't know. Lily might live in a cave. We don't know. We've never seen it. Okay? So, in the director's cut, Lily and Jack realize that they live 2 different lives. She being a princess and he being a feral child of the woods. Mm-hmm. And decide to, kind of, how do I put this? We're just going to be platonic. They decide to stay friends. And so Lily heads towards the kingdom that we assume she probably spoke of at some point in all those minutes that we cut from this film. And Jack, and this one makes sense to me, Jack goes back with his forest friends and the unicorns, which is where he belongs. According to this film, it makes way more sense. I'm going to end this with the reviews.
Ooh.
The monthly film bulletin said, like Blade Runner before it, film buffs, the film suffers so much from an over-expression on detail at the expense of actual story, that it becomes a plodding bore. Plodding. It's okay because the Chicago Tribune called it akin to recalling a bad dream. That quote was from Gene Siskel, from Siskel and Ebert, when he was writing for the Chicago Tribune. Now, Roger Ebert had something to say for the Chicago Sun-Times.
Yes.
He said that the movie had all the right ingredients to be successful, but the film just doesn't work. He appeared to change his mind some after watching the director's cut in 2002, I want to say. Ridley Scott released a director's cut. The director's cut adds more time to the film. Not the original 125. I don't think it goes that far. Okay. But he edits it a little bit differently than the U.S. version, and he actually adds the original music from Jerry Goldsmith. Okay. They took Tangerine Dream and everybody else, they threw that out, and they put it back the way it was. And Ridley Scott considers this the true version of the film, to the point that he and Tom Cruise have both kind of disowned this version, the U.S. version. They tell people, if you want to watch Legend, you have to watch the director's cut, not what was shown in theaters. Okay. And that leads me to a follow-up. Stephen, I think this episode has a part 2. It would be interesting to watch this with the changes that Ridley Scott made to the plot, adding back minutes to it, and with the music the way it was intended, the way it was composed to be played during this film. I think that would be interesting. Even if we just did a mini part 2. Yes. What happens when you watch the director's cut? And maybe we'll say, yeah, that still doesn't work. And then Steve will say, but now we've spent 4 hours of our lives and we had to track down this damn DVD.
As we are at the end of the episode.
Yes.
That if you watch the credits do something that I particularly liked. And that is in the animal handling credits, everyone is referred to as unicorn handlers. There is never a mention of just horse. No. All the animals, every single animal credit, they are unicorns, which I kind of liked.
Find this wherever you can stream. I think it's available almost everywhere. I did not find it free, so hate to be repetitive, but once again, this episode is sponsored by us. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Feel free to comment. And I guess we should say this when we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. If you are listening to the podcast, please leave a review. Those things really help us so that others can listen to our dulcet tones. Any last words, sir?
No.
Once again, the king of brevity. Thank you so much. Have a great night. Or day. Or morning. Whichever.
Sit back, it's time to get groovy. Question, do you remember that movie?